The workshop smelled of linseed oil and thyme. Evelyn Pierce stood before a canvas that had survived 2 centuries, her restoration tools arranged with a surgical precision on the table beside her. The painting, a maritime scene circa 1840, had arrived at her studio 3 weeks ago, with water damage along its lower third. Ships dissolving into fog, sailors becoming ghosts. She understood the assignment without being told. The damage told its own story. Water stains that spoke of a flooded basement, probably decades ago. Someone had tried to save the painting, laid it flat to dry, but the moisture had already worked its way into the sizing, weakening the bond between paint and canvas. Now the lower portion was lifting, flaking, threatening to become nothing more than colored dust. Evelyn had spent the first week just looking at it, not touching, just observing, learning its rhythms. Every painting had a personality, a way it wanted to be handled. This one was proud, she'd decided. It didn't want to be babied. It wanted to be restored with confidence, with decisive hands. Her hand moved across the damaged portion with practiced steadiness, mixing pigments that matched the original palette. Prussian blue, burnt umber, titanium white that hadn't existed when this painting was first created but came closest to what time had stolen. This was the work she understood. Not the original creation, she'd never been an artist in that sense, but the preservation of someone else's vision. The careful archaeology of another person's choices. Why this shade of blue? Why that particular brushstroke? Each decision made a century ago could be decoded, honored, continued. Daniel used to say she was better at preserving the past than living in the present. He'd meant it as a gentle criticism, but Evelyn had heard it as diagnosis. Accurate and unforgiving. She pushed the thought away. 3 years, 2 months, 16 days, and his voice still narrated her failures. Outside, Boston's November afternoon was dying. Rain streaked the tall windows of her Back Bay studio, each drop catching the amber streetlight and sliding down like something trying to escape. She didn't notice when the light changed completely. Didn't notice the hours passing. This was her gift and her curse, the ability to disappear into other people's broken things, to fix what could be fixed, to make the damaged beautiful again. Her phone buzzed. Once, twice, 17 times in succession. She ignored it until the buzzing became a call. Sarah Chen's name lit up the screen. "I'm working," Evelyn said by way of greeting. "It's 8:30. Sarah's voice carried that particular blend of patience and frustration that came from 3 years of being someone's only remaining friend. "You haven't eaten." "I'll eat." When Evelyn set down her brush, finally looking at the canvas with fresh eyes, the repair was seamless, perfect, invisible. No one would ever know this painting had almost drowned. "When I finish," she said. "You're always finishing." Sarah paused and Evelyn heard the rustle of paper, the clink of dishes. Sarah was at the restaurant, the small Korean fusion place in Cambridge where she worked as sous chef. "There's something I need to tell you." The tone made Evelyn's hand tighten around the phone. "What happened?" "Nothing bad, I promise. Just, I got a letter today from Daniel's estate attorney. 3 years. 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days since the funeral, and his name could still do this to her. Make the room feel smaller. Make breathing require conscious effort. Why would his attorney contact you? That's the thing. It's not just me. It's both of us, you and me. There's apparently something in his will that we need to handle together." Sarah's voice softened. "Ev, I think it's about the accident." Evelyn stood very still. The painting before her blurred slightly, ships and sailors becoming ghosts again, but this time from her own tears rather than water damage. "I'll call you tomorrow," she managed. She ended the call before Sarah could protest. Set the phone face down on the table. Returned to her painting with hands that only trembled slightly. The ships stayed ghosts for the rest of the night. The attorney's office occupied the 20th floor of a building that was trying too hard to be important. Glass and steel, and views of the harbor that cost more per square foot than most people's rent. Evelyn arrived exactly on time. Sarah was already there, seated in the waiting area wearing her chef's coat because she'd come straight from morning prep. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and when she saw Evelyn, something complicated crossed her face. "Hey," Sarah said, standing. "Hey." They'd had the same exchange at least 100 times since the accident. A verbal shorthand that meant, "I'm here. I'm still here. We're still here." The attorney who greeted them was younger than Evelyn expected. mid-30s with kind eyes and a handshake that didn't try to prove anything. His name was Marcus Chen, no relation. He assured them with a slight smile, and he ushered them into a conference room that somehow felt less oppressive than the waiting area. "Thank you both for coming," he said, settling into his chair with a folder that looked too thin to contain 3 years of unfinished business. "I know this must be difficult." The word felt inadequate. Difficult was choosing paint colors. Difficult was parallel parking in the North End. This sitting in a conference room to receive messages from her dead husband, this was something else entirely. Sarah spoke first. "The letter mentioned something Daniel left for us, in a manner of speaking." Marcus opened the folder, revealing a single sheet of paper covered in Daniel's handwriting. Evelyn's breath caught. She hadn't seen his handwriting in 3 years, had avoided it deliberately. His desk at home remained exactly as he'd left it, appointment book, scattered notes, a half-finished crossword puzzle, but she'd stopped looking at any of it after the first month. Easier to pretend it was waiting for him to return than to acknowledge those words were fossils, the last traces of a mind that no longer existed. But here it was, the way he looped his Y's, the slight left slant that came from years of writing in cramped spaces. Daniel had been a rare book dealer, accustomed to making notes and margins on scraps on whatever surface was available. His handwriting was like a signature, unmistakable, intimate, uniquely his. Evelyn's hands gripped the edge of the table. "Mr. Pierce left this letter with me 2 weeks before the accident," Marcus continued, his voice careful, "with specific instructions that it should only be opened if certain conditions were met." He looked at Evelyn. "The first condition was that you had begun to move forward with your life in a meaningful way." The words landed like an accusation, or a prediction Daniel had known she'd fail to meet. "I have moved forward," Evelyn said automatically. The lie tasted like ashes. Sarah's hand found hers under the table. Squeezed once. A gentle contradiction that said, "We both know better." Marcus didn't argue. He simply slid the letter across the table. The second condition was that Sarah be present when you read it. He was quite specific about that. The handwriting swam before Evelyn's eyes. She blinked until the words resolved. "My Evelyn. If you're reading this, then I'm gone and you've spent far too long pretending you're fine. I know you. I know how you'll handle losing me. You'll disappear into your work, into other people's broken art, and you'll forget that you're allowed to be broken too. I'm leaving you something, not money. Not a thing you can hang on a wall or hide in a drawer. I'm leaving you a quest because you respond better to projects than to feelings. There's a Patek Philippe pocket watch from the 1920s. It's going to auction next month through Copley House Auctions. Lot 347, it's expensive, probably too expensive, but I need you to try to get it. I can't tell you why. Not yet. But it's connected to your family, Ev. To your grandmother, Eleanor, the one you never met. The one who disappeared. Get the watch. Study it. Let it be the mystery that pulls you back into the world. And Sarah, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what happened to Mia. I know you blame yourself. I know you blame me. But please don't let Evelyn disappear completely. She'll try. Don't let her. With all the love I had time to give Daniel." The silence in the conference room felt geological. Evelyn read the letter 3 times, then a fourth. "Mia," she said quietly, looking at Sarah. "Your sister." Sarah's face had gone very still. She was in the car too. When the semi ran the red light, Daniel and Mia, both gone in the same second. "You never told me. You never asked." No accusation in Sarah's voice, just fact. "You were so destroyed by losing Daniel, I didn't know how to tell you I'd lost her too. So I just stayed, took care of you." That's what Mia would have wanted. Evelyn felt something crack open inside her chest. 3 years of grief, but she'd been grieving alone while Sarah grieved beside her in silence. "The auction," Marcus said, gently pulling them back. "It was last month. The watch sold for $85,000. "I don't have $85,000, Evelyn said. "I know, that's where things get interesting." Marcus pulled out another document. The watch was purchased by 2 bidders who drove the price up bidding against each other online. When neither would concede, Copley House suggested an unusual arrangement: joint ownership, alternating possession every 3 months. Both parties agreed. "Who bought it?" Sarah asked. "One buyer was a private trust established by Daniel, funded through his life insurance policy. For you, Evelyn. Marcus paused. The other buyer is a man named Miles Hartley. He's also in Boston right now, and he's also been asked to meet with his portion of the watch's history. I don't understand, Evelyn said. Neither does Mr. Hartley from what I gather. But Copley House has arranged for you both to meet this Thursday at Bob. You'll discuss the arrangement, examine the watch together, and decide how to proceed. Marcus slid a business card across the table. The curator suggests the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. Neutral ground, public, but quiet. Evelyn picked up the card. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. Something else was happening, something that felt almost like curiosity. Why would Daniel do this? She asked. Marcus smiled. I suspect you're meant to find out. Evelyn didn't go home after the meeting. She went to the Boston Public Library. The research room was nearly empty on a Wednesday afternoon. Just her, a graduate student, hunched over a laptop, and an elderly man paging through what looked like property records from the 1950s. The kind of people who came to libraries to search for things that didn't exist online. Evelyn sat up at a corner table with her laptop, a notebook, and the carefully photographed images of the watch she'd taken before leaving the attorney's office. Marcus had allowed her to hold it for 10 minutes, just long enough to document every detail. She started with Eleanor Hayes, her grandmother. The search results were sparse but tantalizing. Eleanor had been born in 1900 to the Hayes shipping family, Boston Brahmins, with money stretching back 3 generations. She'd shown artistic talent early, attending the School of the Museum of Fine Arts when most women of her class were being groomed for society marriages. Her paintings from the early 1920s showed influence from the Ashkin School, gritty urban scenes, working-class subjects, a rejection of the refined prettiness expected from lady painters. Critics had called her promising and bold, which Evelyn knew was code for unsettling. In 1926, Eleanor had held a solo exhibition at a small gallery in the South End. Reviews were mixed but passionate. Then in 1927, she'd vanished. The official story was that she'd gone to Italy to study Renaissance techniques. But the unofficial story, the one whispered in family letters Evelyn had found in her mother's papers years ago, was darker. Breakdown, institutionalization, a disgrace the family didn't discuss. No one knew what had really happened. Eleanor's artwork had trickled onto the market over the decades, sold by anonymous dealers, each painting increasing in value as her legend grew. The artist who disappeared, the woman who'd chosen art over propriety and paid an unknowable price. Evelyn had grown up with those whispers, had built her own career around preservation, partly because she couldn't bear the thought of Eleanor's work being lost or damaged. Each painting she restored felt like a small act of loyalty to a woman she'd never met. But she'd never known about Martin Hughes, never known Eleanor had been in love. She searched for him next, found a brief obituary from 1970. Martin Hughes, 72, civil engineer, survived by his son James and 2 grandchildren. Known for his work on Boston's subway expansion in the 1930s. A quiet man who loved classical music and long walks through the public garden. Nothing about Eleanor, nothing about lost love or broken promises. But there had to be more. Evelyn expanded her search, looking for any mention of Martin Hughes and Eleanor Hayes together. Found nothing in newspapers, nothing in society columns. Then she tried a different approach. Art gallery records, exhibition attendee lists, anything from 1926, the year of Eleanor's solo show. And there, in a dusty, digitized record from the gallery's guest book, she found it Martin Hughes. Remarkable work, especially The Promise. Evelyn stared at the screen. The Promise, the same painting Miles had mentioned, the one they'd be seeing tomorrow. She sat back in her chair, mind racing. Martin had attended Eleanor's exhibition, had singled out one particular painting, Saching, had written his name in a guest book that survived a century. It wasn't proof of a relationship, but it was a thread, the beginning of a trail. Evelyn copied the information into her notebook, her hand moving quickly across the page. For the first time in 3 years, she felt a particular thrill of discovery. The sense that she was uncovering something that mattered. The library's closing announcement crackled over the speakers. 5 minutes, Evelyn packed up her materials, slowly reluctant to leave this space where the past felt accessible, where questions had the potential for answers. Outside, the present waited, messy and unresolved and full of grief she hadn't processed. But tomorrow she'd see Eleanor's painting. Tomorrow she'd stand beside Miles Hartley and try to understand what their grandparents had been to each other. Tomorrow felt almost like a reason to wake up. The Gardner Museum felt like stepping into someone's private obsession. Art crammed into every corner, pieces arranged by whim rather than logic, and at the center of it all, a courtyard where light fell through glass and made the floors glow. Evelyn arrived 15 minutes early. She'd worn her work clothes, dark jeans, a simple black sweater, boots that had seen better years. The watch, safely enclosed in its custom case, rested in her bag like a small, heavy secret. She'd spent the past 3 days researching it. Patek Philippe, circa 1923. White gold case with Art Deco engraving. Manual wind movement that still kept perfect time after a century. And on the back, barely visible, unless you knew to look, 2 sets of initials intertwined. E.H. and M.H. Eleanor Hayes, her grandmother, whose few surviving paintings commanded 6 figures at auction despite or because of her mysterious disappearance in 27. But who was M.H.? Evelyn Pierce. She turned to find a man standing 3 feet away, and her first thought was that he looked tired. Not physically, he was tall and well-built, with dark hair that needed cutting, and eyes the color of slate, but tired in a way that went deeper than sleep could fix. She recognized it because she saw it in her mirror every morning. "Miles Hartley," he said, offering his hand. His handshake was brief, professional. The handshake of someone who'd learned to keep contact minimal. But his eyes lingered on her face a moment longer than necessary, and Evelyn realized he was cataloging her the same way she was cataloging him. Looking for signs of damage, evidence of grief, the markers that identified fellow survivors. "Should we sit?" he asked, gesturing toward a bench positioned to overlook the courtyard. They sat with careful distance between them. Not hostile, just wary. 2 people who'd been pushed together by circumstance and dead loved ones. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Miles said after a moment. "Why wouldn't I?" "Because this is," but he gestured vaguely at the space between them, the watch case he'd set on the bench. "Strange. Orchestrated by people we loved who aren't here to explain themselves. I'd understand if you wanted no part of it." Evelyn considered this. "Did you consider not coming?" "Every hour since I got the call." Miles's mouth quirked slightly. "But I'm here anyway. Apparently I'm not good at ignoring my father's final wishes. Even when those wishes involve complicated arrangements with strangers. Especially then." Something in his tone made Evelyn look at him more closely. He was wearing dark jeans and a button-down shirt that looked expensive, but rumpled as if he'd slept in it and hadn't cared enough to change. His watch, not the Patek Philippe, but a modern piece, was loose on his wrist, suggesting recent weight loss. She recognized all of it. The small signs of someone not quite inhabiting their life, going through motions, existing but not living. "Your father," she said carefully. "When did he pass?" "March, heart attack." Miles looked down at his hands. "Sudden. He was healthy, or so we thought. Went to bed one night and didn't wake up." "I'm sorry." "And your husband?" The attorney mentioned an accident. Evelyn's throat tightened. She'd gotten better at this over 3 years, the quick summary, the facts without the feelings. But something about Miles's direct gaze made her want to tell the truth instead of the sanitized version. "Car accident, 3 years ago, a semi ran a red light." She paused. "He was 34. We'd been married for 6 years. That's," Miles stopped, started again. "I'm sorry, that's inadequate, but I don't know what else to say." There isn't anything else to say. People try. They offer platitudes about time healing, about him being in a better place, about God's plan. But there's no good response to senseless loss. "No," Miles agreed quietly. "There isn't." They sat in silence for a moment. Around them, tourists moved through the museum, their voices echoing off high ceilings, admiring Titian and Rembrandt in Gardner's eccentric arrangements. But in this small pocket of space, it was just 2 people who understood that the world kept spinning, even when individual worlds ended. Miles pulled out his leather portfolio. "I brought the letter from my father." From it, he extracted an envelope, yellowed with age. "My father left me this. Found it in his papers after he died 6 months ago. I didn't open it until last week." He handed it to Evelyn. Inside was a letter written in careful cursive. "To my son. If you're reading this, you've found out about the watch, about Martin Hughes, my grandfather, your great-grandfather, about the woman he loved and lost. Her name was Eleanor Hayes. She was an artist, brilliant, stubborn. She painted the world as she saw it, not as it was supposed to be. And my grandfather loved her more than anything. But their families wouldn't allow it. She was from old Boston money. He was an engineer's son, Catholic, wrong in every way that mattered to people who cared about such things. They tried to run away together. Eleanor was pregnant, but her family found them, forced her to give up the child, sent her away. By the time Martin found her again, she was gone, disappeared somewhere in Europe, they said. The baby was adopted out. Martin never knew what happened to his child. The watch was his promise to her, that they'd find each other again somehow, that their story wouldn't end with separation. I bought it because I spent my life wondering if I was descended from that lost child. If some part of that love story lived on in me. Find out the truth, Miles. Finish what they couldn't. Dad Evelyn read it twice before looking up. Miles was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Eleanor Hayes was my grandmother, she said quietly. Something shifted in his face. Not quite surprise, more like confirmation of something he had already suspected. Martin Hughes was my great-grandfather. He paused. The initials on the watch, EH and MH. They sat in silence for a long moment, both processing the implications. Around them, tourists moved through the museum, their voices echoing off high ceilings, but Evelyn barely heard them. She was thinking about probabilities, about the odds of two strangers bidding on the same watch, both connected to a century-old love story. This isn't a coincidence, Miles said finally. No. Your husband. His voice was careful. Daniel. He set this up, didn't he? I don't know how he could have known you'd bid on it. Maybe he didn't need to know. Maybe he just knew that anyone connected to this watch would be connected to you. Miles pulled out the watch case from his own bag, set it on the bench between them. Should we look at it together? Evelyn's hand trembled slightly as she opened the case. The watch gleamed in the courtyard's filtered light, its white gold surface catching and reflecting the afternoon sun. It was smaller than modern watches, delicate, designed for a different era. Miles reached for it at the same moment she did. Their fingers brushed against the cool metal. Sorry, he said, pulling back. It's fine. But neither of them moved to pick it up. They just looked at it, this small thing that had somehow survived a century, carrying with it a story of love that never got its ending. The watch sat between them like a question. Its face was pristine Roman numerals in black enamel, delicate hands still keeping perfect time despite its age. But it was the engraving on the back that held Evelyn's attention. The intertwined initials EH and MH surrounded by a border of tiny flowers. Forget-me-not, she realized. The symbol for remembrance. May I? Miles asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Evelyn nodded. He picked up the watch, carefully cradling it in his palm, turned it over to examine the engraving more closely. His thumb traced the initials with a gentleness that surprised her, the touch of someone who understood that some things were more than just objects. My great-grandfather carried this for 43 years after Eleanor disappeared, Miles said. Wound it every night before bed. My father said Martin used to hold it and just sit, for hours sometimes, holding on to the only piece of her he had left. Evelyn felt something crack in her chest. She'd done the same thing with Daniel's things, his coffee mug, his favorite sweater, physical objects that proved he'd existed, that their life together had been real. Can I tell you something? Miles said, still looking at the watch. Yes. I didn't come here today because I care about some century-old romance. I came because I'm drowning. He looked up, met her eyes. My father spent his whole life obsessed with Martin and Eleanor's story, used it as an excuse to never fully engage with his own life. He was a good man, but he was always looking backward, always searching for some past that could explain the present. And you don't want to be like him. I don't want to be like him, Miles confirmed. But here I am, following his trail, holding this watch like it means something. Evelyn understood then why Daniel had set this up. Not just to give her a project, but to put her in front of someone who was asking the same questions. Someone who was trying to figure out how to honor the past without being trapped by it. Maybe it does mean something, she said quietly. Maybe not the way we think, not some grand romantic gesture, but maybe, she hesitated, Maybe it means we're not supposed to do this alone. Miles handed her the watch. She took it, feeling its weight in her palm. Solid, real, proof that love could be forged into something that lasted even when the people were gone. She opened the back case, revealing the mechanism inside. Tiny gears and springs and all working in perfect synchronization. 100 years of ticking, 100 years of keeping time for people who were no longer there to read it. It's still running, she murmured. Martin kept it wound. My father kept it wound. And I've been winding it every night since he died. Miles's voice was rough. Stupid, right, keeping time for dead people. No, Evelyn closed the case carefully. Not stupid, human. They sat there as the afternoon light shifted, turning the courtyard golden. Neither spoke. There was something sacred in the silence, a shared acknowledgement that some moments didn't need words. Finally, Miles cleared his throat. The painting. Tomorrow at 3. Are you still willing? Yes. It's a private collector in Beacon Hill. She knew my father, apparently. He'd tried to buy the promise from her for years. She never sold, but she's willing to let us see it. Did your father ever tell you what the painting shows? No, just that it was Eleanor's most important work, the one Martin loved best. Miles stood, offering his hand to help Evelyn up. I guess we'll find out together. My grandmother disappeared in 1927, Evelyn said. Just vanished. The family said she'd gone to Italy to study art, but there were rumors she'd had a breakdown, that she'd been institutionalized. No one ever confirmed it. My great-grandfather searched for her the rest of his life. Died in 1960, still looking. Miles's voice was distant. My father was obsessed with the story. Used to take me to old buildings in Boston, pointing out places where Martin and Eleanor might have met. I thought it was just family mythology. What if it wasn't? Miles looked at her, then really looked at her, and Evelyn felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years, the faint spark of curiosity about another human being. Not attraction, not yet, just interest, the sense that this person might be worth knowing. The arrangement, Miles said, 3 months each. We could use that time to research. Find out what really happened to them. You want to solve a century-old mystery, don't you? Evelyn thought about her studio, her paintings, the careful, methodical work of restoration. This would be different, messier, more uncertain. No guarantee of success. But Daniel had wanted her to do this, had arranged it all, knowing she'd respond better to a puzzle than to therapy. Okay, she said, but we need rules. Rules. You're an architect. I'm a conservator. We both like structure. She pulled out her phone, opened a note. Rule 1, we split the research equally. No one person carries the whole burden. Miles nodded. Rule 2, complete honesty. If we find something painful, we share it. Rule 3, the watch stays in climate-controlled storage when neither of us has it. No risks. Rule 4, Miles hesitated. We check in on each other. Make sure this isn't making things worse instead of better. Evelyn looked at him sharply. Why would it make things worse? Because we're both clearly running from something. You lost your husband. I lost my father. We're using a watch and a dead love story to avoid dealing with the live grief. The bluntness should have offended her. Instead, it felt like relief, someone finally saying the true thing instead of the polite thing. Rule 5, she said, we're allowed to stop anytime it gets too heavy. No judgment. Deal. They shook hands again. This time the contact lasted a moment longer. Sarah was waiting in Evelyn's apartment when she got home. She'd let herself in with the spare key Evelyn had given her years ago and had apparently been cooking because the whole place smelled like garlic and sesame oil. You cooked, Evelyn said, dropping her bag by the door. You don't eat unless someone forces you. Sarah looked up from the stove. How was it? Strange. Strange how Evelyn sank into the worn couch that had survived 2 moves and countless tears. His great-grandfather and my grandmother were in love. The watch was their promise to each other. And somehow Daniel knew or guessed or arranged it so that Miles and I would end up as co-owners. Sarah turned off the stove, came to sit beside Evelyn. Daniel was always weirdly intuitive about people. He wanted me to have a project, a reason to engage with the world. Evelyn closed her eyes. I'm so tired, Sarah. I know. No, I mean, I'm tired of being this person. The widow who can't move on. The woman who only talks to her dead husband's best friend. I'm not his best friend. I'm your friend. You were Mia's sister first, and she'd want me to be here, just like Daniel wanted you to have that watch. Sarah stood, headed back to the kitchen. Now come eat. You can tell me about Miles while we have dinner. They ate at the small table by the window overlooking the street. Sarah had made japchae, which had been Mia's favorite dish. Evelyn wondered if that was intentional or unconscious. The noodles were perfect, slippery and sweet savory, studded with vegetables and beef. Sarah had been teaching herself to cook after Mia died, learning from YouTube videos and recipe blogs. Mia had been the cook in their family, the one who hosted dinner parties and experimented with fusion dishes. After she was gone, Sarah had taken up cooking like a form of prayer, a way to keep her sister alive through food. He seems careful, Evelyn said, describing Miles, like he's used to handling fragile things. So are you. That's different, said Sarah, twirled noodles around her chopsticks. You handle old paintings. He designs buildings. Both of you work with things that can break. Evelyn considered this. In her work, she dealt with things already broken, paintings damaged by time or accident pieces that needed careful restoration. Miles designed things meant to stand against time, structures built to last. Two different approaches to impermanence. He lost his father 6 months ago, Evelyn said. He's still, She stopped. He's still raw. Takes one to know one. They finished dinner in comfortable silence. Outside, the street was quieting down. A couple walked past, laughing about something. The sound felt foreign, like music from another planet where people still laughed easily. Sarah cleaned up, despite Evelyn's protest, moving around the small kitchen with practiced efficiency. She'd been doing this for 3 years, showing up with food, tidying, making sure Evelyn's apartment didn't become the physical manifestation of her grief. Evelyn had let her. It was easier than arguing, easier than admitting how much she needed it. When Sarah was done, she dried her hands on a dish towel and turned to face Evelyn. Her expression had shifted, determined, nervous, resolved. I need to tell you something, Sarah said, about the accident. The temperature in the room dropped, or seemed to. Evelyn's hands went cold. You don't have to. I do. I should have told you 3 years ago. Sarah took a breath, held it, released it slowly. Mia was driving, not Daniel. The police report says the semi ran the red light, which is true, but Mia had been drinking. Not much, just enough to slow her reaction time. If she'd been sober, she might have swerved in time. The words came at Evelyn like physical blows. She tried to process them, to fit them into the narrative she'd constructed over 3 years. Daniel had been driving. Daniel had died instantly. The semi had come out of nowhere, and there was nothing anyone could have done. But that wasn't true, or it wasn't complete. The police never said. The police were kind. Her blood alcohol was 0.06, just under the legal limit. And the semi did run the red light. So officially, it wasn't her fault. The driver was charged. But unofficially, Sarah's voice cracked. Unofficially, I know my sister. I know she'd had wine at dinner. I know her reflexes were slower than they should have been. Evelyn tried to speak, but couldn't find words. 3 years of grief, and the story had been wrong, or incomplete. Daniel hadn't just been unlucky, he had made a choice. Had trusted someone impaired to drive him home. Daniel knew, Sarah continued. He was in the passenger seat. He could have told her not to drive. But he was tired from a long day, and he trusted her, and he didn't say anything. They were only 5 minutes from home. He thought it would be fine. Sarah, I blamed him for a long time. Blamed you by extension, because you got to grieve publicly while I had to keep Mia's secret. Had to protect her memory. Sarah's voice cracked. But I'm done with that. I'm done with blame. Mia made a choice. Daniel made a choice. Neither of them meant to die. Neither of them thought 2 glasses of wine and a short drive home would end everything. The apartment felt very small. Evelyn could hear her own heartbeat, loud and insistent, reminding her she was still alive when 2 people she loved weren't. She stood, crossed the small space between them, pulled Sarah into a hug that neither of them had allowed themselves for 3 years. Sarah's body was rigid at first, then slowly softened. Her arms came up around Evelyn's back. They held each other while the weight of 3 years of separate grieving pressed down on both of them. I'm sorry, Evelyn whispered. I'm so sorry I never asked. I was so buried in my own loss, I never thought about yours. Never made space for you to grieve too. I didn't make space for it either. I was too busy being angry. At Mia, at Daniel, at Gusser, fate, or whatever decided that night. Sarah pulled back slightly, her eyes red but clear. But anger doesn't change anything. They're still gone. And we're still here, and maybe it's time we actually dealt with that. Evelyn nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. They pulled apart slowly. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of mascara across her cheek. Evelyn handed her a tissue. This thing with Miles, Sarah said, her voice steadier now. This research into your grandmother. Maybe it's good for you. Maybe Daniel knew what he was doing. Or maybe he was grasping at straws. Maybe, but straws are better than drowning. Sarah managed a small smile. And from what you've told me, Miles seems like someone who gets it. Someone who understands that grief isn't linear or logical. He said he's drowning too. Then maybe you can learn to swim together. It was a nice thought. Hopeful. The kind of thing Sarah said when she was trying to find light in darkness. Evelyn wanted to believe it. Wanted to think that two drowning people could somehow help each other stay afloat. But she'd learned not to trust hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope set you up for disappointment. Still, there was the watch, the painting they'd see tomorrow, the mystery of Eleanor and Martin, a story that had waited a century to be uncovered. Maybe that was enough. Not hope exactly, just curiosity. A reason to wake up tomorrow that wasn't obligation or habit. Thank you, Evelyn said quietly, for staying, for being honest, for not giving up on me even when I gave up on myself. That's what family does, Sarah said. And your family, Ev. Mia loved you. Daniel loved you. That makes you mine. After Sarah left, Evelyn sat by the window and looked at the city lights. The apartment felt different somehow, less like a tomb, more like a waiting room. A place between one life and whatever came next. Somewhere out there, Miles Hartley was probably doing the same thing, sitting alone, thinking about dead relatives and impossible coincidences. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. This is Miles. Got your number from the attorney. Found something you should see. Are you free tomorrow afternoon? She stared at the message for a long moment before typing a response. What did you find? 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. A painting, one of Eleanor's, in a private collection here in Boston. The owner is willing to let us see it tomorrow at 3. It's called The Promise. Evelyn's heart kicked once hard. I'll be there. Send me the address. She set down her phone, looked at the watch case which she'd placed on the coffee table. In the lamplight, she could just make out the engraved initials through the glass. E.H. and M.H. Eleanor and Martin. A promise made a century ago, still echoing forward through time. Evelyn touched the glass lightly, feeling the cool surface against her fingertips. Tomorrow she would see a painting her grandmother had made when she was young and in love and convinced that promises mattered. Tomorrow she would stand beside a stranger who was becoming less strange with each passing hour. Tomorrow she would take the first real step forward she'd taken in 3 years. But tonight, for the first time since Daniel's death, she let herself feel something other than numbness. Not hope exactly, not yet, but maybe the faint possibility of hope. The way dawn begins not with light, but with the absence of absolute darkness. She went to bed thinking about watches and paintings and the strange mathematics of inheritance. Somewhere in her dreams, Eleanor was painting a portrait of someone who looked almost like Martin, but not quite. Someone taller, with darker eyes. Someone who might have been Miles. The Beacon Hill townhouse looked like it had been frozen in 1920. Evelyn stood on the brick sidewalk, staring up at the narrow facade with its black shutters and window boxes that probably bloomed with geraniums in summer. Now, in late November, they held only bare soil and the ghost of warmer months. Miles arrived 3 minutes after her, slightly breathless, carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. Peace offering, he said, handing her one. I wasn't sure how you took it, so I went with the cream and sugar. That's perfect, actually. Evelyn wrapped her cold hands around the cup. Thank you. They stood there on the sidewalk, neither quite ready to knock on the door. The morning was sharp and clear, the kind of day where Boston felt like it was carved from glass and light. A woman walked past with a small dog. A delivery truck rumbled down the narrow street. I didn't sleep, Miles admitted. Kept thinking about what we might see, what Eleanor was trying to say with this painting. Me too. Evelyn had lain awake until 3, her mind spinning through possibilities. A portrait of Martin. A landscape that held secret meaning. Some kind of coded message. What if it's disappointing, Miles asked. What if it's just a painting and we're reading too much into all of this? Then it's just a painting. But Evelyn didn't believe that. Daniel had orchestrated this for a reason. Eleanor had named it The Promise for a reason. Nothing about this was random. Miles checked his watch, his modern one, not the Patek Philippe. It's 3. Should we? They climbed the steps together. Miles rang the bell. Somewhere inside, chimes echoed through what sounded like a long hallway. The woman who answered was in her 70s, elegant in the way that came from money and careful maintenance. Silver hair pulled back in a chignon. Pearls. A cashmere cardigan that probably cost more than Evelyn's monthly rent. Miles Hartley, she said, smiling. You look so much like your father. Please come in. And you must be Evelyn Pierce. Yes, ma'am. Catherine Whitmore. Please call me Catherine. She stepped back, ushering them into a foyer that smelled of old wood and furniture polish. I was so sorry to hear about James's passing. He was a persistent man, called me every year about that painting. He never gave up on things he wanted, Miles said quietly. No, he didn't. Rather like his grandfather, I suspect. Catherine led them down a hallway lined with paintings, old masters, modern abstracts, everything carefully lit and labeled. I acquired The Promise in 1987 at a small estate sale in Cambridge. The moment I saw it, I knew I'd never sell it. It's the most emotionally honest painting I've ever encountered. She stopped before a closed door, turned to face them. Before we go in, I need to tell you something. This painting, it's not what you're expecting. Eleanor Hayes painted it in early 1927, just weeks before she disappeared. Her family tried to buy it back after she vanished, offered me a fortune over the years. I always refused. Catherine's eyes were sharp, assessing them. Because I believe Eleanor wanted this painting to survive, to be seen, to tell the truth she couldn't speak aloud. She opened the door. The room was small, designed as a private gallery. Track lighting illuminated a single canvas on the far wall, and Evelyn's breath caught. The painting showed a woman, young, dark-haired, dressed in the style of the 1920s, standing in what looked like the public garden. Behind her, the swan boats floated on the pond. The Ritz was visible in the distance. But none of that mattered because the woman wasn't looking at any of it. She was looking down at her hands cradled protectively over her stomach. And on her face was an expression of such complex emotion, joy and terror, and defiance and love, that Evelyn felt tears spring to her eyes. She's pregnant, Miles said, his voice rough. Yes. Catherine moved to stand beside the painting. This is Eleanor Hayes at 26 years old, pregnant, unmarried. In 1927, that was a scandal that could destroy a family. Evelyn stepped closer, studying the brushwork. Eleanor had painted herself with brutal honesty, the shadows under her eyes, the tension in her jaw, the way her fingers pressed against her belly, as if she could protect the child through sheer will. But there was something else. Reflected in the pond behind Eleanor was a second figure, a man watching her. You could only see his outline, barely more than a shadow, but his posture spoke of longing. Martin, Evelyn whispered. The title, The Promise, refers to 2 things, I believe. Catherine's voice was gentle. The child she's carrying, and the man reflected in the water who promised to stand by her, no matter what. Miles had moved to stand directly in front of the painting. He was so still, Evelyn could barely see him breathing. What happened to the baby, he asked. That's the question, isn't it? Catherine sighed. There are no records, no birth certificates under Eleanor's name, but there are whispers, family stories passed down, that Eleanor was sent away, that the baby was born and given up for adoption, that the Hayes family made it all disappear. Evelyn's mind was racing. If Eleanor had a baby in 1927 and that baby was adopted out, then my mother was adopted, she said slowly. Born in 1927. We never knew who her biological parents were. The records were sealed. The room went very quiet. Miles turned to look at her. My grandmother was adopted too, same year. But the family story was that she was my grandfather's child from a previous relationship. We never questioned it. But what if Evelyn couldn't finish the sentence? The implications were too large. Catherine was watching them with something like satisfaction. Your father suspected this, Miles. He spent years trying to prove it, but adoption records from that era are nearly impossible to access. He believed that Eleanor's child children, perhaps if she had twins, were adopted separately, that both of you might be Eleanor and Martin's descendants. Twins, Miles repeated. That would explain why they were separated. Easier to place two babies individually than together. Evelyn felt like the floor was tilting. She'd spent her whole life knowing she was connected to Eleanor Hayes through her adopted mother, but she'd assumed it was distant, a cousin perhaps. Not direct descent, not Eleanor's own child. There's more, Catherine said. She pulled an envelope from her pocket. Your father left this with me 3 years ago, Miles, with instructions to give it to you if you ever came to see the painting. I believe he wanted you to have context before you read it. Miles took the envelope with shaking hands. Evelyn could see his name written on the front in handwriting she now recognized as James Hartley's. Read it, Evelyn said softly. I'm here. Whatever it says, you're not alone. Miles opened the envelope, pulled out a single sheet of paper, began to read aloud. My dear son, if you're reading this, you found Evelyn Pierce. You've seen the painting. You understand now what I spent a lifetime trying to prove. Your grandmother Margaret and Evelyn's mother Patricia were twins, Eleanor and Martin's daughters, separated at birth and adopted into different families. The Hayes family paid to have the records sealed and the connection hidden. They couldn't risk the scandal. Miles's voice was steady, but Evelyn could see the tension in his shoulders. I met Patricia once by accident at an art gallery in 2003. The resemblance to my mother was striking. When I learned she was also adopted, born in 1927, I knew. I tried to tell your grandmother, but she was in late-stage Alzheimer's by then. The knowledge would have only confused her. Why am I telling you this now? Because I'm dying, Miles. The doctor gives me 6 months, and I don't want this story to die with me. Eleanor and Martin loved each other. They were separated by prejudice and money and families who valued reputation over happiness. But their love survived. It created life. And that life led to you and to Evelyn. Find her, tell her the truth, and maybe, just maybe, you can finish the story that Eleanor and Martin started. Not by repeating their romance, but by choosing to know each other. By refusing to let shame and secrecy define your family any longer. I love you. I'm sorry I won't be there to see how this unfolds, but I believe in the possibility of healing, even across generations. Dad. The silence that followed was profound. Evelyn couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. The world had just rearranged itself around a single fact: Miles Hartley was her cousin. They were family. Eleanor and Martin's grandchildren brought together by a watch and a painting and 2 dead men who'd understood something about the power of truth. Cousins, Miles said, finally looking at her. We're cousins. Second cousins, technically. Or first cousins once removed. I never understood the terminology. Evelyn laughed a slightly hysterical sound. This is insane. I was going to say overwhelming. Catherine was smiling, tears in her eyes. I think it's beautiful. 2 families separated for almost a century, brought back together. Eleanor and Martin would have loved this. Evelyn looked back at the painting. At Eleanor, young and pregnant and terrified but defiant. At the shadow of Martin in the water watching over her. At the promise the painting embodied that love could survive. That truth eventually emerged. Can I? She stepped closer to the canvas, pulling out her phone. May I take a photograph for research? Of course. Document everything you need. Evelyn photographed the painting from multiple angles, capturing details. The way Eleanor's hand curved protectively. The reflection of Martin. The swan boats in the background. Every brushstroke felt significant, now loaded with meaning. Miles moved to stand beside her, not touching, but close enough that she could feel his presence. Family, she thought. This person is family. My father kept this secret for years, Miles said quietly. Carried it alone. Why didn't he reach out to your mother, to you? Fear, maybe, Catherine suggested. Or respect for the privacy your grandmother and Patricia had built. They'd lived their whole lives not knowing the truth. James might have thought it kinder to let them die in peace. Instead, he left it for us to discover, Evelyn said. Like a delayed inheritance. Perhaps that's exactly what it is. Catherine moved toward the door. I'll leave you two alone for a bit. Take your time. This is a lot to process. After she left, Evelyn and Miles stood before the painting in silence. The afternoon light was shifting, casting different shadows across Eleanor's painted face. I don't know what to feel, Miles admitted. Relief, anger that we weren't told sooner. Gratitude, all of it probably. Evelyn turned to look at him, really look at him, trying to see Eleanor and Martin in his features. The dark hair could be from Eleanor. The slate-colored eyes might be Martin's. Or maybe she was just looking for patterns because she wanted them to be there. Do you see it? Miles asked. Family resemblance. I don't know, maybe around the eyes, or maybe I'm inventing it. Same. He pulled out his phone, opened his photo gallery, scrolled until he found what he was looking for. This is my grandmother Margaret, about age 50, I think. Evelyn looked at the photo, an older woman with Eleanor's bone structure, the same determined chin, the same way of holding her head. And this, Evelyn found her own phone, pulled up a photo. My mother, Patricia, a few years before she died. Miles took the phone, stared at the image. They could be the same person, just different angles of the same face. It was true, Patricia and Margaret had the same features, just slightly shifted. Mirror images separated by adoption and fate. They never knew each other, Evelyn said. Never knew they were sisters. No, but we do. Miles handed back her phone. What do we do with that knowledge? Before Evelyn could answer, her phone rang. An unknown number. She almost declined, but something made her answer. Ms. Pierce, this is Robert Chen from Copley House Auctions. I apologize for calling on a Saturday, but we've received an unusual I thought you should know about. An offer for the Patek Philippe watch. A private collector has offered $170,000 to purchase it outright from both you and Mr. Hartley. Double what you paid. He's willing to close immediately. Evelyn's mind went blank. $170,000. Enough to buy a house, pay off debts, live comfortably for years. Who's the collector? She managed. He wishes to remain anonymous, but he's legitimate. We've verified his funds. He wants an answer by Monday morning. I need to discuss this with Miles. Can I call you back? Of course, but Ms. Pierce offers like this don't come often. I'd seriously consider it. She ended the call, looked at Miles, who'd clearly heard the entire conversation. $170,000, he said, for a watch, for our family history. Is that what it is, or is it just a thing, the pretty antique that we've built a story around? The question hung between them. Evelyn looked back at the painting, at Eleanor's protective hands, at Martin's shadow, at the promise that had endured a century. I don't know, she said honestly. I don't know what's real anymore. Miles was quiet for a long moment. Then, let's not decide now. Let's sit with it. Do more research. Find out if the family connection is really true or if we're just hoping too hard. Okay. But Evelyn, whatever we find out, I'm glad Daniel set this up. I'm glad I met you. Something warm unfurled in Evelyn's chest, not quite happiness, more like the possibility of happiness. The sense that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she'd thought. I'm glad too, she said. They left the Beacon Hill townhouse an hour later, both quiet, both processing. Catherine had given them copies of everything. She had old exhibition catalogs, letters from James Hartley, photographs of Eleanor at various ages. The afternoon had turned gray clouds rolling in from the harbor. It might snow tonight. Boston's first snow of the season. Coffee, Miles suggested. Somewhere we can talk this through. There's a place in Cambridge, small, quiet, and good for thinking. They took the tea across the river. The cafe was called Petrichor, tucked into a side street near MIT. Evelyn had discovered it years ago, back when she was still herself, before grief had hollowed her out. She hadn't been back since Daniel died, but today felt like a day for revisiting old places. Inside the cafe was warm and smelled like espresso and old books. Mismatched furniture, local art on the walls, a corner where graduate students hunched over laptops. They ordered cappuccino for her, Americano for him, and found a table by the window. Okay, Miles said, pulling out his notebook. Let's be logical about this. What do we actually know versus what we're assuming? Evelyn appreciated the structure, the way he was approaching this like an architectural problem. Facts first, then theory. Facts: Eleanor Hayes and Martin Hughes were in love in the mid-1920s. The watch exists with their initials. Eleanor painted herself pregnant in early 1927. She disappeared shortly after. Both our mothers were adopted born in 1927, but we don't have access to sealed records. Assumptions. Our mothers were Eleanor and Martin's children. They were twins. The family separated them deliberately. Counter evidence, it could be a coincidence. Two women adopted the same year doesn't prove they were twins. Eleanor might have given birth to one child, not two, or lost the baby entirely. Miles nodded, making notes. How do we find proof? DNA test would work, but our mothers are dead. Osabas? Evelyn stopped. Do you have any of your grandmother's things? Hair, maybe jewelry she wore regularly. My father kept some of her belongings. A hairbrush, I think. Would that work? Maybe, if there's enough genetic material, though I have no idea how legal it is to test DNA from a deceased person without explicit consent. Legal gray area. Miles tapped his pen against the notebook. What about adoption records? Could we petition to have them unsealed? It's possible, but it takes time. Months, probably years. We'd need to prove compelling reason, medical necessity usually. They sat in frustrated silence, so close to an answer but separated by bureaucracy and time, and the same forces that had separated Eleanor and Martin. The collector who wants to buy the watch, Evelyn said slowly. What if he's connected somehow? What if he knows something about the history? You think someone's trying to bury the story? I think someone's willing to pay a lot of money for a watch that should only be valuable to us. Evelyn pulled out her phone, opened her email. The auctioneer said he'd wants to remain anonymous. That seems suspicious. Or rich people being weird about privacy. But Miles looked intrigued. How would we find out who he is? I might know someone who could help. Evelyn scrolled through her contacts, found the name she was looking for. Sarah has a friend who works in estate sales. He knows everyone in the collector community. If there's gossip about someone suddenly desperate for a specific piece, he'd hear it. She sent a quick text to Sarah, needs your friend Marcus's number, the one who deals with estate sales. Kind of urgent, the reply came almost instantly. What's going on? Tell you later. Please, fine. But you're buying me dinner and explaining everything. A minute later, a contact card appeared. Marcus Joe with a Cambridge area code. Evelyn called before she could overthink it. The phone rang 3 times before a man's voice answered. Marcus Joe? Hi, Mr. Joe. My name is Evelyn Pierce. I'm a friend of Sarah Chen's. She said you might be able to help me with something. Any friend of Sarah's. What do you need? I'm trying to find out information about a collector who's interested in a Patek Philippe pocket watch from the 1920s. He's offered to buy it through Copley House Auctions, but wants to remain anonymous. I need to know who he is and why he wants it so badly. There was a pause, then, Patek Philippe, you said white gold Art Deco engraving. Yes, how did you? Because I know exactly who your buyer is, and you need to be very careful. Evelyn's stomach dropped. Miles leaned forward, trying to hear. His name is Charles Hayes. He's Eleanor Hayes' great-nephew, her brother's grandson. The family's been trying to acquire every piece of Eleanor's work and any artifacts connected to her for decades. They're systematically erasing her from history. Why? Because Eleanor's disappearance was a scandal the family never recovered from. They've spent a century trying to bury the truth. If that watch has evidence about what really happened to her, Charles Hayes doesn't want it in anyone else's hands. Evelyn felt cold. We're related to Eleanor, through her children. Marcus went very quiet. Then you're in more trouble than you know. The Hayes family, they're powerful, Evelyn. Old Boston money with long memories. If you're claiming descent from Eleanor, if you're planning to challenge the narrative they've built, they'll come after you. Come after us. How? Lawsuits, harassment, social pressure. I've seen them do it before to anyone who got too close to the truth about Eleanor. Miles was watching her face. She knew he could tell something was wrong. Thank you for the warning, Evelyn said quietly. Can I ask, why are you telling me this? Aren't you part of that world? I am, but I'm also gay and my family mostly ignores my existence. I don't owe the Hayes clan any loyalty, and I've always thought Eleanor deserved better than to be memory holed by people who were ashamed of her. Marcus paused. Sarah's a good person. She cares about you. So I'm going to give you one piece of advice: document everything. Every piece of evidence you find, every conversation, every threat. Because if you're going to take on Charles Hayes, you need to be prepared for war. After she hung up, Evelyn relayed the entire conversation to Miles, watched his expression shift from curiosity to concern to something that looked like determination. So we have a choice, he said. Sell the watch, take the money, forget all of this. Or keep digging and possibly make very powerful enemies. Not much of a choice. No, Miles agreed. It really isn't. They looked at each other across the cafe table. The snow had started, big flakes drifting past the window, turning Cambridge into something soft and forgiving. I vote we keep the watch, Evelyn said. Keep researching. Tell Charles Hayes to go to hell. Miles smiled. It was the first real smile she'd seen from him. Not polite, not careful, but genuine. I was hoping you'd say that. They spent the rest of the afternoon strategizing. Miles pulled up architectural records looking for buildings owned by the Hayes family in 1927. Evelyn searched newspaper archives for any mention of Eleanor's disappearance. They traded theories, built timelines, tried to reconstruct a century-old cover-up. By the time the cafe closed at 8, they had a working theory. Eleanor had been sent to a private home for unwed mothers. The babies, if there were twins, had been born there and immediately adopted out through a lawyer connected to the Hayes family. The records had been sealed to protect the family reputation. But how do we prove it? Evelyn asked as they stepped out into the snow. We find the home, find records that weren't sealed. Maybe staff diaries, financial ledgers, anything that might have escaped the purge. That's a lot of archives to search. Good thing I'm unemployed with nothing but time. Miles adjusted his scarf. My firm gave me extended leave after Dad died. They're being patient, but eventually they'll want me to come back or resign. Right now, I don't care about either option. Evelyn understood that feeling, the way grief made everything else seem unimportant. I'll help, she said. My clients can wait. Or not, I don't really care either. They stood on the snowy sidewalk and something passed between them. A recognition that they were both in the same place, untethered adrift, looking for something to hold on to. This is crazy, Miles said. We met 3 days ago. We've discovered we're related. We're planning to take on an old money Boston family who've spent a century covering up a scandal. And we're doing all of this because of a watch. When you put it that way, it sounds insane. It is insane. So, do you want to stop? Miles considered this. Snow caught in his dark hair, melting slowly. No, I think this is the first thing I've wanted to do since my father died. The first thing that feels like it matters. Same. They started walking toward the tea station. The snow was accumulating, quickly turning the city white and clean. Fresh start weather, Daniel used to call it. Weather that made you believe things could change. Can I tell you something, Evelyn said. Something weird. After the day we've had, I don't think anything qualifies as weird anymore. Fair point. She took a breath. I feel guilty for wanting this, for being excited about solving this mystery, because it feels like I'm moving on from Daniel and I'm not ready for that. Miles stopped walking, turned to face her. Moving on doesn't mean forgetting, he said quietly. It means carrying them with you while still living your own life. Your husband orchestrated this whole thing because he wanted you to have something to care about. He wanted you to find your family. That's not moving on from him, that's honoring what he wanted for you. The words hit Evelyn like a physical thing. She felt tears start, then stop them through sheer force of will. Not here, not on a public street. Thank you, she managed. And for what it's worth, I think my father would have liked you. He was always drawn to stubborn people who refused to give up. Is that what I am, stubborn? Very. Miles smiled slightly. It's a compliment. They rode the tea in companionable silence. Evelyn got off at her stop. Miles continued to his temporary apartment in Somerville. Before the doors closed, he called out, "Same time tomorrow to start searching for that home." Same time tomorrow, Evelyn agreed. The door slid shut. The train pulled away. And Evelyn stood on the platform in the falling snow, feeling something she hadn't felt in 3 years. Purpose. Sarah was waiting in Evelyn's apartment when she got home. She'd let herself in again, but this time she hadn't cooked. She was just sitting on the couch, hands folded. Expression serious. "We need to talk," Sarah said. Evelyn's momentary lightness evaporated. "About what?" "About the fact that Marcus called me after he talked to you. About the fact that you're apparently planning to investigate a powerful family who've been known to destroy people, about the fact that you're throwing yourself into this mystery like it's going to save you. It might, Evelyn said quietly, sinking onto the couch beside her. Or it might just be another way to avoid dealing with your grief. Why can't it be both? Sarah didn't have an answer for that. She just looked at Evelyn with the same expression she'd worn 3 years ago at the funeral, worried, helpless, determined to keep her alive, even if Evelyn wasn't sure she wanted to be. Tell me everything, Sarah said finally. From the beginning, I want to understand what you're getting into. So Evelyn told her about the painting, about James Hartley's letter, about the theory that she and Miles were cousins descended from Eleanor and Martin, about Charles Hayes and his attempt to buy the watch and bury the truth. Sarah listened without interrupting. When Evelyn finished, she was quiet for a long moment. You're going to do this no matter what I say, aren't you? Sarah asked. Yes, even though it's dangerous, even though it might end badly. Even though, Sarah sighed. Then I'm helping. You're not doing this alone. If the Hayes family comes after you, they come after both of us. Sarah, you don't have to. Yes, I do, because that's what family does. And you're family, Evelyn. You've been family since Mia brought you home for Thanksgiving sophomore year, and you helped me make kimchi for the first time. You're stuck with me. Evelyn felt something in her chest crack open. Not breaking, more like thawing. Like ice that had held too long finally giving way to spring. I don't deserve you, she whispered. No, you don't. But you have me anyway. Sarah pulled her into a hug. Now let's order Thai food and you can tell me everything you know about this Miles person. Because from what I'm hearing, he's important. He's my cousin. Maybe, but is that all he is? Evelyn pulled back, frowning. What are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just noticing that this is the most animated I've seen you in 3 years. And it's not just about the mystery, it's about him too. He's grieving his father. I'm grieving Daniel. We're cousins probably. And we met 4 days ago. All of that can be true and it can still be something else too. Sarah stood heading for Evelyn's laptop. Now show me this painting. I want to see Eleanor Hayes. They spent the rest of the evening looking at the photographs Evelyn had taken. Sarah, who knew nothing about art but everything about reading people, immediately zeroed in on Eleanor's expression. She's scared, Sarah said, but not of being pregnant. She's scared of what comes next, of losing the baby maybe, or losing the man she loved. She lost both, Evelyn said softly. No, she lost Martin, but the babies they survived, they grew up. They had children of their own. One of those lines led to you. Sarah looked at her. That's not loss, Ev, that's legacy. Evelyn stared at the painting on the screen, at Eleanor's protective hands, at Martin's shadow, at the promise that had somehow impossibly led to this moment. Legacy, maybe that was what this was really about. Not just solving a mystery or reclaiming family history, but understanding that love didn't end when people died. It continued, transformed, became something new with each generation. Daniel had understood that, had set this whole thing in motion because he knew Evelyn needed to be part of something larger than her grief. I'm going to find out what happened to her, Evelyn said. Whatever it takes. Eleanor deserves to have her story told. Then we'll find it together, Sarah said. You, me, and your probably cousin Miles. Team Eleanor. Team Eleanor, Evelyn echoed. Outside, the snow was still falling. Boston was transforming into something clean and new. Inside, 3 people who'd lost people they loved were beginning to build something that looked almost like hope. It wasn't a happy ending, not yet. But it was a beginning, and sometimes beginnings were enough. The Boston City archives smelled like old paper and institutional disinfectant. Evelyn had been sitting at the same microfilm reader for 3 hours scrolling through records from 1927. Her eyes burned, her neck ached. But she kept going because somewhere in these yellow documents was proof. Miles was 2 tables over working through property deeds. Sarah had taken the morning shift at the restaurant, but promised to join them after lunch. They'd been at this for 5 days now, methodically searching through every possible lead. So far, they'd found nothing. Evelyn, Miles's voice cut through her concentration. She looked up to find him standing over her table holding a printout, his expression strange. I found something, he said, St. Catherine's Home for Women, opened in 1923, closed in 1955, owned by Wambridge. Let me guess, a Hayes family trust. Yes, but that's not the interesting part. He set the printout in front of her. Look at the address. Evelyn read it twice before the significance hit her. That's in Brookline, 3 blocks from where Eleanor's family lived. They sent her somewhere nearby, kept her close but hidden. Miles sat down across from her. If we can find the home's records, we might find birth certificates, names of adopted children, proof. Those records would have been destroyed. The Hayes family wouldn't leave evidence. Maybe, or maybe someone kept copies. Staff records, personal diaries, something. Miles pulled out his phone. St. Catherine's was run by Catholic nuns. When it closed, the building was sold, but the church might have kept records. Let me make some calls. He walked away, phone already to his ear. Evelyn sat back in her chair, mind racing. St. Catherine's, a home for unwed mothers hidden in plain sight. Eleanor could have walked there from her family home, could have looked out the windows and seen her old neighborhood while she was trapped pregnant, waiting to lose her children. The cruelty of it made Evelyn's chest tight. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Ms. Pierce, this is Charles Hayes. We should meet. There are things you need to understand about Eleanor before you continue this investigation. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. my office. Please don't make me ask twice. The threat was barely veiled. Evelyn's hands shook slightly as she forwarded the message to Miles and Sarah. Both replied within seconds. Miles, don't go alone. Sarah, I'm coming with you. No arguments. Evelyn stared at the message from Charles Hayes. Part of her wanted to ignore it, to refuse to be intimidated. But another part, the part that had spent 3 years studying damaged paintings, knew that sometimes you had to see the full extent of the damage before you could begin repair. I'll be there, she typed back. I'm bringing a witness. The reply came immediately. As you wish. Charles Hayes's office occupied the top floor of a building in the financial district. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. Art that cost more than most people's houses. A receptionist who looked like she'd been hired specifically to make visitors feel inadequate. Ms. Pierce and Ms. Chen, the receptionist said, her tone suggesting she'd been expecting them. Mr. Hayes will see you now. Sarah squeezed Evelyn's hand once before they walked into the inner office. Charles Hayes was in his 60s, silver-haired, wearing a suit that probably cost $5,000. He stood as they entered, offering a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Ms. Pierce, thank you for coming. He gestured to chairs positioned before his desk, lower than his own, Evelyn noted. A subtle power play. And you must be Ms. Chen. I wasn't aware you were part of this situation. I'm her family, Sarah said flatly. Where she goes, I go. How loyal. Charles settled into his chair. I'll get straight to the point. I understand you've been researching Eleanor Hayes, making claims about family connection. I want to offer you an alternative arrangement. I'm listening, Evelyn said, keeping her voice neutral. Sell me the watch for $200,000. Sign a non-disclosure agreement stating you will not publicly claim descent from Eleanor Hayes. And in return, I'll give you access to the Hayes family archives, everything we have about Eleanor. You can research her, write about her, satisfy your curiosity. You just can't claim to be her blood. The offer was smoother than she'd expected, more generous, which meant Charles Hayes was more worried than he was letting on. Why? Evelyn asked. Why does it matter if people know Eleanor had children? Charles's expression hardened. Because Eleanor Hayes was mentally ill. She had a psychotic break in 1927. She was institutionalized for her own safety and the safety of others, the child she claimed to be carrying. There was no child. It was a delusion brought on by her illness. The words landed like blows. Evelyn felt Sarah tense beside her. You're lying, Evelyn said. We've seen the painting. Eleanor was pregnant. Eleanor painted many things. She also painted fantastical creatures and imagined landscapes. Her art was not documentary evidence. Charles leaned forward. My family has protected Eleanor's reputation for a century. We've kept her work valuable, kept her legacy alive. But if you go public with claims that she was pregnant, unmarried, abandoned by her family, you'll destroy everything we've built. And for what? To claim a connection to a woman who would have been horrified by your existence? That's enough, Sarah said sharply. You don't get to rewrite history to make your family look better. I'm not rewriting anything. I'm telling you the truth that Eleanor's own family witnessed. She was sick. She needed help. We helped her. Charles pulled a folder from his desk drawer. These are medical records from Brookside Asylum. Eleanor was admitted in March 1927 and remained there until her death in 1963. She spent 36 years in psychiatric care. There was no secret pregnancy, no hidden children, just a very talented, very sick woman who we loved and tried to protect. He slid the folder across the desk. Evelyn's hands shook as she opened it. The records looked legitimate. Admission papers signed by Eleanor's father, doctor's notes describing paranoid delusions, violent episodes, incoherent speech. A death certificate dated October 12, 1963, cause of death listed as pneumonia. "I'm sorry," Charles said, and he almost sounded sincere. "I know you wanted a different story, but sometimes the truth is simply sad. Eleanor was ill. She died in an institution. And the kind thing, the right thing is to let her rest in peace instead of dragging her name through scandal." Evelyn couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. 3 years of grief, and she'd been using this mystery as a lifeboat. But what if it was all fiction? What if she'd just been desperate for a story that made sense for family that wasn't dead? Sarah stood. "We're leaving. Please think about my offer," Charles said. $200,000. Full access to the archives. And the dignity of letting Eleanor's memory remain untarnished. It's more than fair. They left without responding, rode the elevator down in silence, stepped out onto the street where afternoon traffic rushed past, indifferent to the collapse of everything Evelyn had been building. "He's lying," Sarah said once they were a block away. "Those records are fake." They looked real. Of course they looked real. He's had a century to prepare them. Sarah pulled Evelyn into a coffee shop, ordered them both something strong and sweet. "Listen to me, rich people rewrite history all the time. They have the money and the power to make their version of truth become the official version. But that doesn't make it true. What if he's right, though? What if Eleanor was just sick? What if I've been building this whole fantasy because I couldn't handle real life?" "Then where's the baby in the painting?" Sarah demanded. "If she was just delusional, why paint herself pregnant? Why give the painting to someone outside the family? Why did Martin Hughes search for her the rest of his life?" Evelyn wanted to believe her, wanted to think Charles Hayes was just a desperate man trying to hide his family's shame. But doubt had crept in, cold and insidious. Her phone rang. "Miles, there's Files. I found her," he said without preamble. Sister Mary Catherine. She worked at St. Catherine's Home from 1920 to 1955. She's 98 years old, living in a retirement home in Newton, and she's willing to talk to us. Today. Now. The retirement home was nicer than Evelyn expected. Clean, well lit, with actual care visible in the details. Sister Mary Catherine, no longer wearing a habit, but still possessing a nun's straight-back dignity, waited for them in a private room. She was tiny, barely 5 feet tall, with skin like tissue paper and eyes that were still sharp. "You're Eleanor's girl," she said, looking at Evelyn. "You have her face. Different coloring, but the same bones." Evelyn sank into a chair. "You remember her." "I remember all my girls, but Eleanor, she was special, smart, stubborn, terrified." Sister Mary Catherine's hands trembled slightly as she poured tea. "She came to us in January 1927, 5 months pregnant. Her family said she needed rest and privacy. We knew what that meant." "What happened to the babies?" Miles asked gently. "Babies, plural. You know then." Sister Mary Catherine nodded. "Twin girls, born July 15, 1927. Eleanor labored for 18 hours. She was so young. Just 26, but she seemed younger. She kept asking for Martin, begging us to find him, but we'd been told he was dangerous, that he'd taken advantage of her." "That was a lie," Evelyn said. "They were in love." "I suspected as much, but we were nuns. We followed the rules, the family's wishes." Guilt flickered across the old woman's face. "The babies were taken immediately. Eleanor never even got to hold them. She screamed for 3 days straight. Then she just stopped. Went silent. They took her away a week later. Said she'd had a breakdown." "To Brookside Asylum," Miles said. "Is that what they told you?" "No. She was sent to Europe, Italy, I think. The family paid for her to live in a private villa hidden away. They sent money every month through a lawyer." She was never institutionalized. She was just disappeared. Evelyn felt the world realign. She wasn't sick. Oh, she was sick. Sick with grief, sick with loss, but not insane. Never insane. Sister Mary Catherine pulled a small wooden box from beside her chair. I kept something I wasn't supposed to, but I couldn't let Eleanor vanish completely. She opened the box. Inside were two items, a small bracelet woven from thread and a photograph. The photograph showed Eleanor in a hospital bed, face pale and exhausted, looking down at two swaddled infants in her arms. Her expression was one of absolute love and absolute anguish. I took this, Sister Mary Catherine whispered, before they took the babies. Eleanor needed proof that they were real, that she hadn't imagined them. I gave her this copy before she left. Evelyn's vision blurred with tears. She held them. For 10 minutes, that's all we could manage. But yes, she held them. The old nun touched the photograph gently. The girls were adopted separately, different families. We were told never to keep records, but I wrote their names in my prayer book. Patricia Rose and Margaret Ann, born July 15, 1927, to Eleanor Hayes and Martin Hughes. Our mothers, Miles said, his voice breaking. Our grandmothers? Yes, and I'm so sorry we took them from her. Sorry we let the family silence her. But I kept this, and I prayed that someday someone would come looking, that Eleanor's story would be told. Sister Mary Catherine handed the photograph to Evelyn. Take it. Tell people what really happened. Don't let them bury her again. They sat in Miles's car in the parking lot for 20 minutes, none of them able to move. Sarah was crying silently in the back seat. Miles stared straight ahead, knuckles white on the steering wheel. And Evelyn held the photograph, this fragile piece of proof that Eleanor had existed, had loved, had lost everything. We need to get the DNA test done, Miles said finally. Conclusive proof. Then we take all of this, the photograph, Sister Mary Catherine's testimony, the records we've found, and we go public. Before Charles Hayes can stop us. He'll sue, Evelyn said. He has resources, lawyers, power. Let him. We have the truth. Miles turned to look at her. And sometimes the truth is enough. Evelyn thought about Eleanor, young and pregnant and in love, forced to give up her children, sent away to live out her life in exile, never allowed to tell her story. She thought about Daniel, who'd set all of this in motion, who'd known she needed something to fight for. She thought about Sarah and Mia and the grief they'd carried separately for 3 years. And she thought about Miles, her cousin, her family, the person who understood loss in the same language she spoke. Okay, she said, we do this right. We document everything. We contact historians, journalists, anyone who will listen. And we finish what Eleanor and Martin started. Team Eleanor, Sarah said from the back seat. Team Eleanor, Miles and Evelyn echoed. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. They contacted a genetic testing company that specialized in familial relationships, used DNA from the hairbrush of Miles's grandmother and a locket of Patricia's baby hair that Evelyn's mother had kept. The results came back unequivocal. Margaret and Patricia were identical twins, and Miles and Evelyn were second cousins. They worked with a documentary filmmaker who'd been trying to make a film about lost women artists. She was ecstatic about the footage that photographed Sister Mary Catherine's testimony. They reached out to the Boston Globe. A reporter who specialized in historical injustice was fascinated by the story. And through it all, Charles Hayes remained ominously silent. Until the morning the Globe story was set to run. Evelyn woke to find her studio vandalized, not destroyed, nothing damaged beyond repair. But every canvas had been marked with a single word in red paint, liar. She stood in the middle of her workspace, surrounded by accusations, and felt something inside her shift. Not break. Strengthen. She took photographs, called the police, filed a report. Then she called Miles. They're trying to scare us, she said when he answered. Is it working? No, it's making me angry, and I'm tired of being scared. Good, because we have an appointment in an hour. Appointment with the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. They want to discuss acquiring the Promise and the Watch for Permanent Exhibition, a complete gallery devoted to Eleanor and Martin's story. Evelyn sat down hard on her paint-stained floor. Are you serious, though? Completely. The curator saw the advanced copy of the Globe story. She wants to make this the centerpiece of next year's exhibition on hidden women artists. Full context, full truth. Eleanor's story told the way it should have been told a century ago. This was it, the moment to decide. Keep the watch, keep the connection private, or give it to the world and let Eleanor's love story become public history. Evelyn thought about the painting, about Eleanor's protective hands on her belly, about Martin's shadow in the water, about a promise that had taken a century to fulfill. Let's do it, she said. Let's give them everything. The meeting with the museum was surreal. The curator, a woman named Dr. Reeves, who'd spent 30 years studying early 20th century women artists, was reverential about the materials. She handled the watch like it was made of light. She studied the photograph of Eleanor with her babies with tears in her eyes. This changes everything we know about her work, Reeves said. The paintings from her final years, the ones we thought were abstract expressions of mental anguish, they were mourning. She was painting grief, the loss of her children, of Martin, of the life she should have had. When can you open the exhibition, Miles asked. 6 months, maybe sooner if we push. But I want to do this right. Full catalog, symposium. Bring in scholars who've studied trauma-forced adoption, institutional silencing of women. Make this more than just an art show. Make it a reckoning. That sounds perfect, Evelyn said. There's one condition. De Reeves looked between them. The Hayes family will fight this. They'll claim the watch and painting rightfully belong to them as Eleanor's closest living relatives. We need your testimony, your DNA evidence, your willingness to be public about your connection to Eleanor. You'll be exposed, she continued. Your lives will be scrutinized. The Hayes family has significant resources, and they will use them. Are you prepared for that? Evelyn looked at Miles, saw her own determination reflected back. Yes, they said in unison. The Boston Globe story ran on a Sunday morning. Front page above the fold. The headline, The Silenced Artist, How Boston's Elite Erased Eleanor Hayes. By noon, it had been picked up by the AP. By evening, it was trending on social media. Art historians, feminists, adoption, rights advocates, everyone had an opinion. And Charles Hayes issued a statement denying everything, called it a fabrication by distant relatives seeking money and attention. But then Sister Mary Catherine gave an interview. Then the documentary footage aired. Then Dr. Reeves at the Gardner Museum announced the acquisition and upcoming exhibition. The narrative shifted. Pressure mounted. Other families came forward with similar stories of forced adoptions, hidden pregnancies. Women disappeared into institutions or exile. Eleanor Hayes became a symbol. Not just of one woman's tragedy, but of centuries of silencing. And through it all, Evelyn painted. She'd started the night after the vandalism. Couldn't sleep, couldn't sit still. So she'd set up a fresh canvas and just worked. No plan, no restoration, just creation. She painted Eleanor as she imagined her in Italy, older gray-haired, standing on a balcony overlooking the Mediterranean. In her hands, 2 small, worn photographs of babies she'd held for 10 minutes and remembered for 36 years. Behind her in the painting, barely visible, was Martin's shadow. Still there, still watching, still loving her across distance and time and loss. It was the first painting Evelyn had ever made. Not restored, not preserved. Created. When she finished 3 weeks after everything started, she stood back and looked at what she'd made. It wasn't perfect. The proportions were slightly off. The color mixing showed her inexperience. But it was true. It was honest. It was hers. Miles found her there at midnight, standing in front of the canvas covered in paint. I brought wine, he said, holding up a bottle, to celebrate or commiserate depending on how today went. The Hayes family dropped their lawsuit, Evelyn said. Their lawyer called an hour ago. They're not admitting to anything, but they're not fighting the exhibition either. We won, I think. Or at least we didn't lose. Then we're celebrating. Miles set down the bottle, stepped closer to look at the painting, was quiet for a long time. Is this Eleanor? The way I imagine her, in her exile, still connected to what she lost. It's beautiful, he paused. You painted this. Don't sound so surprised. I went to art school. I just haven't made anything new in years. Only fixed broken things. Maybe that's what we've both been doing, fixing broken things, including ourselves. Miles moved to stand beside her, not touching, but close enough that she could feel his warmth. They looked at the painting together, at Eleanor's imagined face, at the ghost of Martin, at the photographs of children who grew up to create children who grew up to find each other a century later. "Thank you," Evelyn said quietly, "for doing this with me, for not giving up when it got hard." "We're family," Miles said simply. "That's what family does." And Evelyn realized it was true. Miles had become family not just because of shared DNA, but because they'd chosen each other, had shown up for each other, had helped each other carry grief that was too heavy for one person alone. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we live. We finish the exhibition, we tell Eleanor's story, and then we figure out what our own stories look like." That sounds terrifying. I was going to say hopeful. Miles smiled, that real smile she'd seen so rarely. "Same thing, I think. Hope is always a little terrifying." They stayed there in the studio until dawn, talking about everything and nothing, about their lost loves and found family, about Eleanor and Martin and the strange mathematics of inheritance, about what it meant to honor the man while still claiming the future. As the sun rose over Boston, painting Evelyn's workshop in shades of gold, and rose, she felt something shift inside her chest. The grief was still there, would always be there, but it had made room for other things too, for curiosity and connection and the fragile possibility of joy. Daniel would have liked Miles, she thought, would have approved of this unlikely family they were building from loss and determination and a century-old pocket watch. The watch itself sat in its case on her work table, waiting to be delivered to the museum next week. In the morning light, the engraved initials seemed to glow: E.H. and M.H. Eleanor and Martin. A promise made in love, kept through death, fulfilled by strangers who became family. Evelyn picked up the watch, held it for a moment, then handed it to Miles. "Your turn," she said. "You should wind it." He took the watch carefully, opened the case, wound it with the small key that had survived 100 years of different hands. The mechanism ticked to life, steady, persistent, still keeping time for people who were no longer there to read it, but also keeping time for the people who were here, who were elite, who were learning to carry their grief without being buried by it. "To Eleanor and Martin," Miles said softly. "To Eleanor and Martin," Evelyn echoed. "And to us, the inheritance they left behind." Outside, Boston was waking up. The city moved into a new day, indifferent to individual stories of loss and love and legacies that span generations. But inside a paint-stained studio in Back Bay, two people who'd spent months drowning separately were learning to swim together. Were learning that healing didn't mean forgetting, that moving forward didn't require leaving the past behind. It meant carrying love, the love you'd lost and the love you'd found, and trusting that both could be true at the same time. The watch ticked on. Time, after all, didn't stop for grief, but it made room for hope. 6 months later, the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum glowed in the evening light. Inside, the gallery dedicated to Eleanor Hayes overflowed with people, art historians, journalists, adoption rights activists, and descendants of other women whose stories had been silenced. At the center of it all, the promise hung beside the Patek Philippe watch, both spotlit, both finely visible in the way they were meant to be. Evelyn stood before the painting with Sarah on one side and Miles on the other. Around them, strangers read the placards explaining Eleanor's story, explaining how her children had been taken, how she'd been exiled, how her love for Martin had endured despite everything, and how a century later her grandchildren had refused to let her be forgotten. "She would have liked this," Miles said. "Being seen, being known. She would have liked that she helped create us," Evelyn added, "that her story didn't end with loss." Sarah squeezed both their hands. She'd be proud. Across the room, Sister Mary Catherine sat in a wheelchair surrounded by reporters wanting her first-hand account. At 98, she'd become an unexpected advocate for opening sealed adoption records and acknowledging institutional harm. Charles Hayes had not come to the opening, but he'd sent flowers, white roses, no card, an acknowledgement perhaps, or an apology. Evelyn chose to interpret it generously. "I have something to show you," Miles said, pulling out his phone. "Came in today." It was an email from an adoption registry. A woman in Chicago had seen the news coverage, had taken a DNA test. The results showed she was a third cousin to both Miles and Evelyn. Eleanor and Martin's family tree was growing branching, revealing itself after a century of forced silence. "We should contact her," Evelyn said. "I already did. She wants to meet. She has questions about Eleanor." "Don't we all?" Sarah said. They moved through the gallery reading testimonials from other families who'd been affected by forced adoptions. Looking at Eleanor's paintings, which now felt less like abstract expressions and more like encoded messages. Grief made visible, love made permanent. In the corner, Evelyn's painting hung the one of Eleanor in Italy, holding photographs of her lost children. The museum had asked to include it in the exhibition. "Contemporary response to historical silencing," the placard read. It wasn't as technically perfect as Eleanor's work, but it was true. And truth, Evelyn had learned, was more important than perfection. As the evening wound down and the crowd thinned, Miles and Evelyn found themselves alone in front of The Promise. "Do you ever wonder," Miles asked, "what Eleanor would think of all this of us?" "I think she'd be grateful and maybe a little surprised that her story mattered to so many people." "It matters because it's not just her story. It's every woman who was silenced, every family that was broken by shame and power and money." Miles looked at the painting, and every person who refused to let the official version be the only version. Evelyn thought about Daniel, about the watch he'd known she needed to find, about the journey he'd set in motion because he understood that grief needed purpose. "I miss him," she said quietly. "I miss him every day. But I'm grateful too, for what he gave me, for the fact that I'm standing here instead of disappearing into my studio forever." "He loved you well," Miles said. "Yes, yes he did." They stood there in silence, the comfortable kind that came from shared experience and earned trust. Around them, the museum settled into its evening quiet. Guards made rounds, lights dimmed. Art waited patiently for the next day's viewers. Sarah appeared carrying 3 paper cups of wine from the museum cafe. "To Eleanor," she said, raising her cup. "To Martin," Miles added. "To love that survives everything," Evelyn finished. They touched cups together. The sound echoed softly through the gallery. Outside, Boston sparkled in the spring darkness. Inside, 3 people who'd been strangers 6 months ago stood together as family. Not the family they'd been born into, but the family they'd chosen. Built from loss and determination and the understanding that healing was possible, even when it seemed impossible. The watch ticked on its velvet cushion, time moving forward as it always did. But now moving forward with witnesses, with truth, with the promise that some love stories, even the broken ones, could find their endings, or rather their continuations. Because love didn't end when people died. It transformed, became memory, became legacy, became the reason people fought for truth a century later. Eleanor and Martin had lost each other, but they'd created something that survived loss, a connection that spanned generations, a love that became family, a promise that was finally impossibly beautifully fulfilled. As Evelyn walked out of the museum into the spring night, Miles on one side and Sarah on the other, she felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years. Not happiness exactly, not yet, but the possibility of it, the sense that maybe someday joy would be allowed back into her life, and that was enough. For now, that was more than enough.